It wasn't that long ago that smartphones seemed like a sci-fi fantasy, and yet it's hard to imagine what modern life would be like without them. So who actually invented them in the first place? Let's find out on today's episode of
Colossal Questions.
In order to understand how the iPhone came to be, we have to go back to the very beginning of the mobile phone. And it turns out mobile phones are older than you might think. The very first successful mobile telephone calls were offered to the first-class customers aboard a German train that ran between Berlin and Hamburg, all the way back in 1926. By the mid-50s, the first mobile phones were released for personal vehicles in Sweden. Only a little over 100 people signed up for the bulky tech, so it's safe to say it wasn't a hit. Over the next few decades, telephone companies continued to develop the technology to make mobile phones smaller, more reliable, and eventually handheld. In the early 70s, an engineer at Motorola made the first public call from a mobile phone. It looked bulky by today's standards, but at the time, it was considered quite a feat to make a mobile phone so small. A decade later, Motorola released the Motorola Dynatech 8000X. This phone was nicknamed the Brick because it was about the size and weight of a concrete brick. It cost almost $4,000. Could only handle about half an hour of talk time and took about 10 hours to charge. A decade later, IBM released the Simon Personal Communicator. It's considered the first smartphone ever sold. It had a touchscreen and a few basic apps, like a clock, calculator, notepad, and address book. But it was also fairly big at a time when mobile phones were getting smaller and smaller, so it was quickly pulled off the shelves after poor sales. Then, finally, in 2007, the iPhone was released by Apple, and the smartphone took about 5 giant steps forward all at once. It hit the shelves in the US on June 29, 2007, with thousands of people around the country lining up and even camping outside stores to get their hands on one. In the years since, other companies have released their own smartphones, and new models have all kinds of high-tech features. The only question remaining is, what's coming next?